after sending a note to Brad Thor, a friend of many years. My goodness, Brad, I've known you forever. And I sent him a note. I said,
Enough.
when are we going to talk about Shadow of Doubt? Because they took the book down on Sunday when I got back from Ohio. And he didn't. And it was on the calendar for today. And I said, oh my God. So, of course, I read Shadow of Doubt in 2 days. And Brad, congratulations. It's fabulous. And it's up there on
Thank
the
you,
top
Hugh.
of the best selling list. And can I give you my favorite line first from page 224?
Sure, sure.
Don't tell your friend or I'll kill you myself. All right, no, I'm not going to give any context. We're not going to give anything away. That's a very good line, and that is a great character. I'm not even going to tell who the character is
Thank
because
you.
then they'll be able
Thank
to
you.
piece something together. But that's a new character. Don't tell your
Yep.
friend or I'll kill you myself. Where did that character come from? And you can tell people as much as you want about the character.
Sure. Well, I want to back up a little bit because you don't know this, Hugh, but you actually played a pivotal role in the very first chapter of Shadow of Doubt.
Well, you killed
Several
a
years.
silver haired 60 something guy in the first chapter. I almost put the book down.
It's how that man was killed that you were involved with. Several years ago, you had a dinner that you invited me to, and you sat me next to Chris Costa, who is the director of the International Spy Museum. And I asked Chris, what's the most interesting thing you have in the museum? And he said, you know what, Brad? I think one of the coolest things we have is the ice axe that was used to kill Trotsky in Mexico City in 48 when Stalin wanted him assassinated. So I had held on to that ice axe thing and I wanted to use it. I wanted it to be a calling card for a Russian assassin. And I opened up the book with that. So I've been waiting for this interview so I could say that's because of you, Hugh Hewitt, that's in chapter 1.
Well, but the guy who gets the axe in the head, we can give this away because it's in the first
Yeah.
chapter, is a 60 something silver haired French intelligence agent. I am not French. I've never served in the Secret Services, but I have silver hair and I have no desire to have an ice pick in my head. Trotsky, what? It's 1938, not 48, right? That's when he gets off, or
Was it
1940? I can't
30?
remember.
You're probably right. I'm off by
Uh,
10 years, I would imagine. I could pull it up
but
on my
really, did it
phone.
have to be a silver haired 60 something to get the axe? I really thought maybe I had done a bad interview with Brad Thor.
No, 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 no. I wanted to show his wisdom, his expertise, his dedication to the intelligence community, and the ideas of the West together against Russia. So that's why he had silver hair. That's where any comparisons end, right
Okay.
there, Hugh.
All right. I want to tell you, Brad, it is fascinating to see Russia up in front and center again. And I will give this much away. Our primary locales in this book are in France. There is a little bit of Norway. There's a little bit of America because we got the agency involved. I've never heard of the term skip legacy, but a skip leg. You want to explain to people what a skip leg is at the agency?
That so that's artistic license. I have been fascinated with Julia Child's role in the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, and how she went from OSS to CIA, and she had all these incredible things she did. She invented shark repellent. So when I talked about a skip legacy, that was actually I have a character that in my mind was the granddaughter of Julia Child, and
Ah,
that character chose to work and so instead of it being grandmother, mother, daughter that worked there, it was grandmother, then granddaughter. So skipping a generation. So I invented that term, skip legacy, that it skips a
well, I
generation.
like the term, and there have got to be a few of them around. I also like the fact that
Yes.
you've got in this book, and I'm jumping all around because I don't want to give anything away. Russia House has now become the coolest table in the lunchroom again. The lunchroom of the CIA. Tell people what Russia House is. Tell people why it might be the coolest table in the lunchroom again.
So after 9/11, obviously we saw a ton of resources and attention diverted into counterterrorism. So that was very, very popular, still is a very necessary, super important part of the Central Intelligence Agency. But Russia has also come back and become very much in vogue. So when I write about kind of the inner workings at the CIA, the idea that everybody wanted to be doing counterterrorism stuff, everybody wanted to go out west and study Arabic at the language school, but that now Russia had made a resurgence. And so, focusing on Russia House in this book and the intelligence, the CIA analysts and intel officers that work in there trying to know what Russia's up to and what their next move might be, that was a fun area of conflict and intrigue within the United States that I wanted to focus on for the thriller.
Author Brad Thor talking about his brand new book, Shadow of Doubt. whether you're listening on the podcast or you're listening to the Thursday show, the best part of Shadow of Doubt is it really seriously takes you into the mind of Vladimir Putin. Now, it doesn't do so by naming Putin, but it does so by talking about the president of Russia and his various pressures and dreams, girlfriends, and estate. Brad, I was kind of surprised to see you to revert to Russia this time. When did you make that choice?
You know what? I'll tell you, Hugh. This I think you'll appreciate this. I was casting about, trying to take all these ideas I had and put them into a kind of a through line, a narrative that would work to hold the book from the first page to the very last. And I thought I knew a lot about NATO, and I actually found some things about NATO that I didn't know. And do you remember the Sapphire Affair from the 1960s? Where we had a big
No.
Russian defector. Okay, so in the
Oh
1960s,
yes,
there was
yeah.
something
Oh
called this.
yes.
Yeah, in real life. Yeah. So a big Russian defector came over, the CIA got him, and he had an absolute nightmare piece of intelligence, which was that the French government was shot through with Russian spies, Soviet spies. It freaked President Kennedy out. He ended up writing a letter and giving it to an aide and said, take it over to the president of France, stand in front of him, watch him as he reads the letter, and then take the letter back because we didn't know who we could trust and how bad the penetration was with the French. And I was fascinated by this. I'd gone to school in Paris. I had no idea that NATO's original headquarters were right behind the Arc de Triomphe by about 2 blocks. A big building was built in the shape of an A, but that, de Gaulle was a little too big for his britches and wanted to be on the same footing as the Brits and the Americans. And we said, no, you guys are not ready for that. And so we played the hokey pokey with NATO with kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And we ended up moving the headquarters to Brussels. So there's all this backstory that I found very, very interesting. And with Brexit, with the Brits pulling out of the EU, Macron has really moved the French to be the 800-pound gorilla in Europe. And we don't read a lot in the press about how much support the French in particular are giving to the Ukrainians for 2 reasons. They want the Ukrainians to be well trained and dependent upon French weapon systems. And the French realize that the warfare that's happening in Ukraine with drones is the future of warfare. And they want their advisors to be able to teach their military how to do the same stuff the Ukrainians are doing. And because the French have stepped up and want to be kind of the people who set the terms militarily for Europe and start increasing their power in NATO, it's got the Russians freaked out. So the Russians in real life are very focused on France in trying to repenetrate or go even deeper into their services. And what's hard for the Russians is at the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, their spies have been kicked out of almost every single embassy throughout Europe. So it's become very, very difficult for them to operate. So that's kind of the fertile ground that I was working with when I put together the idea for Shadow of Doubt.
Now, I pay you the highest compliment I can make to a thriller writer is that it educates me about the real world. I did not know about the distribution of tactical nuclear weapons, about our withdrawal of them from the UK, about why
Mm-hmm.
Poland would not be an appropriate place to place tactical nuclear weapons, despite the fact that Russia has made these noises. And one of the plot lines that opens in the first chapter, so I don't want to give anything away, is the movement of tactical nukes from Russia proper to Belarus, and
Mm-hmm.
the problems that that would confront an American president with if they wanted to deter their use. How did you decide to make? By the way, can I rely on that stuff about Poland and the
Yes.
UK and France? I
It's
didn't. Yeah.
all it's all correct. We'd have to use F-16s. There's only a couple of bases that the Poles are flying the F-16s out of, and then you have to worry about being in the range of the Russian missiles out of Kaliningrad and so on and so forth. So all the tactical stuff in there is accurate and not made up.
The Transitarius stuff as well. I mean,
Oh
this
yeah.
is where Russia has become, again, a minor partner in the axis of evil. It's not China. It's not our biggest bear. It's not, I shouldn't, it's not the biggest dragon in the sky. It's the bear in the woods. But the bear in the woods is still there. And Putin is kind of crazy. Do you think he's kind of crazy?
I do, and I want to give credit. I talk a lot in the book about there being these different gateways, these doorways into Russia, and this is not my idea. I give a big shout out in the acknowledgement section of the book to a geopolitical strategist named Peter Zion that's been talking for some time about Putin's not necessarily crazy. Putin's dealing with and there might be some things with Putin that are problematic psychologically, but Putin has a country that is very wide, very flat, and very difficult to defend. And there's essentially 9 doorways into Russia, ways in which Russia's enemies have invaded in the past. And Russia had control of all of them at the end of World War II, but now has lost with the collapse of the Soviet Union. They've lost all but 2. And so and by the way, when the Soviet Union collapsed, their education system collapsed, the death rate doubled, the birth rate was cut more than half. So this is the last generation the Russians will be able to field an army of fighting age men that's on any level to do anything. So Putin is dealing with a geographical issue of trying to shore up these back doors into Russia with a declining population. And so it was bound to happen is the concept that Peter Zion puts out there, that Putin was going to be forced to do this. And I found that fascinating. I'd never heard that before as a way to explain Putin's actions. And I thought, okay, politics is downstream of culture, and I'm always looking for interesting, real geopolitical things to put. I mean, I write spy thrillers, but I want people to not only have a great white knuckle thrill ride, but to close the book smarter. And so that's why I wanted to weave in how we might be looking at it the wrong way and how the CIA might be goosing the White House to open its eyes in other directions.
A reader will also walk away informed as to the demographic crisis of Russia, one which has accelerated post Ukrainian invasion part 2 under Joe Biden. And not only do they have a birth dearth, they've got millions of people bolting the country because they want no part of Putin's adventures. I'm glad you worked that in. And so that's my hat off to you there. I also did not know, and I wonder where this came from, PACE, a plan of communications, primary, alternative, contingency, emergency. Now, I happen to have military in my family, and they think like this, but they've never used that. It's like the OODA loop. You run into something, and you'll never forget it. I'll never forget PACE. Where did you pick up PACE? Primary, alternative, contingency, emergency, plans of communication.
So that I got from, there used to be a unit that was, before Delta Force built its compound that it's in now at Fort Bragg. It was these buildings that look like they were from south of the border. And they used to jokingly refer to the Delta Force compound at Fort Bragg as the Fiesta Cantina, which is kind of a funny way to describe their old buildings. But there was a unit there, the U.S. government, this is during the Cold War, had combed the Ranger battalions looking for Rangers who grew up in households where German was spoken. And they pulled these guys out of the Ranger battalions and they sent them over to Berlin. I did this. I talked about this unit in my 3rd book, State of the Union, where we had this guerrilla force that was planted in Berlin. So if the Soviets ever overran the wall, they could be countered. This group could slow them down. They had weapons hidden in parks all over Berlin and Krugerrands and radios that were plastered up in the walls of basements of beer stubes across Berlin. And it was one of those guys was a buddy of mine who had served in this unit during the Cold War, and he had explained to me this concept of PACE. So that's where I got that.
It hit home because the weekend before I read Shadow of Doubt, I had taken my 2 grandchildren who are the oldest, and they're not teenagers yet, but they're old enough to take directions and figure it out. I can leave them alone at Fenway. They're both baseball fans. So we went to Fenway. Oh, wow. But as we were standing in Fenway, I thought, what happens if we get separated in the city in which they've never been, in a ballpark at which they've never been? And how do we find each other? So I began to set up with them. Here's where we will meet if you get separated. Here's the backup. Here's what and they don't have cell phones. Their parents don't want them to have cell phones until they're 16, and I fully approve of that. But people used to do contingency planning, Brad, and they don't really do it anymore. I think your book might provoke them a little bit to think about maybe cell phones are not going to be there someday.
No, and you definitely, even the Red Cross pushes this, that you should have this contingency planning with your family in case cell phone towers go down. Where would you meet? What's the backup to that place in case that place is also affected by some sort of man-made or natural disaster? It's just smart. We used to do this. We used to have larders in this country. We used to keep our pantries full. I mean, there's a reason that, people have grown. I don't know, complacent. I think they've just been lulled into this idea that the store shelves will always be stocked, everything's always going to work. So I agree with you. I think the smart person has a backup plan every single
All right,
time.
now a couple of quick questions, Brad. In Shadow of Doubt, there is the typical one of the things people love out of Brad Thor novel is they get a feel for different places and different locales. Is there a hotel center, or did you make that up?
No, that actually exists in the Marais in France. And even the restaurant, really funny side story. The person I was talking about who taught me pace, he was one of my neighbors in the same building where I met our mutual friend, a former hostage czar and national security advisor, Robert O'Brien. And I gave a copy of the book to Robert O'Brien. And in chapter 1, I talk about this restaurant in the Marais that's called Robert and Louise. And Robert O'Brien had been there. I said, "Come on, it's this tie." He says, "No, it's a classic in Paris. You really nailed it." And he said, "I have a T-shirt." I said, "Why would you have a T-shirt from this tiny little place that just spit roast meat?" And he says, "Well, I'm Robert, and it's Robert and Louise." He said, "My wife's middle name is Louise, and so that's why I had to get the T-shirt."
Oh, that is fabulous. Now, the next thing the last thing, are Russian oligarchs still in the south of France? It used to be a given that they had their yachts and they would hang out in Monaco and adjacent French cities. And then a lot of this book takes place in the south of France. Are the oligarchs still there, or have they been expelled? I mean,
They've
not
largely
killed,
been expelled.
expelled.
No, no, no. They
Okay.
Yeah, the French have done that, largely pushed them out. And but I had set up in the last book that this particular oligarch thought he was so smart by putting everything in his mistress's name, which would allow him to kind of breeze in, breeze out. And as you know, Scott Harvath and doesn't want to upset the French, which pushes him to conduct a little operation in Monaco because there was no way they were going to come after him and try to exact revenge for the op. So it was a fun book.
Yeah,
But
it's a
the Rolling
very
Stones did.
it, it's a very glowing review for the DGSE and DGSI, and there's a good
Mhm.
television series about the DGSI, but I'd never really known about the DGSE until this book. Do you have contacts with them?
No, I know some people that have worked with them, and so I didn't have anybody directly in the DGSE. I've read about some of their exploits around the world and everything. And, they're the French version of the CIA, and they've got. It's interesting. I've talked to a couple of people who've worked with them, so I was able to extract some cool nuggets of information, some color details that I was able to put in the
All right,
book.
now tell me finally about Macron, because you've got a French president here. We are left with the impression that this French president is a good character. I have never really gotten a fix on Macron. What does Brad Thor think of Macron?
You know what? For somebody who's a bit of a Francophile, as I am, having grown my mom spoke French, so I grew up speaking French. Went to a school run by a French order of nuns. Listen, my politics have always been right of center. That's always been who I am. So, I mean, Macron's an interesting cat. I've been very, very pleased to see how he stepped up as far as Ukraine is concerned, because I am a diehard anti-Russian. I don't like Putin. I don't like Russia. I don't like anybody invading a sovereign nation. And at the same time, I can also say that in 2014, when Putin went into Crimea in the Donbass, that the Obama administration absolutely fell down on the job and did not honor the Budapest Memorandum, where we told the Ukrainians after the collapse of the Soviet Union, if you give up your nukes, because 1/3 of the Soviet arsenal was in Ukraine, we told them, give up your nukes, we'll make sure nothing ever happens to your country. And they said, okay, get Russia to sign that too. This was pre-Putin. The Russians signed it, but that paper was worthless when it came down to protecting the Ukrainians. I'm glad we're at least doing something now.
Yeah, I can't get a fix on the guy because he seems more afraid of his right wing than he does of the Russians, although he has done a lot in various places in Africa. Brad, congratulations on Shadow of Doubt. It's a fabulous thriller, not to be unexpected. I got a last technical question. Your thrillers
Sure.
come out later in the summer than all the other guys who are my standard guests. Why is that?
You know what? We used to come out in June, and then we used to come out in July. And this year, I got to kind of the climax of the book, and I just didn't have it where I wanted it. So it was just a matter of me needing a few more weeks on it, and that pushed us into August. So I think a lot of it is it is a challenge, Hugh, to do a book a year and to keep the
Oh,
quality high. And so I'd rather be late to market than give my readers a bad book. I refuse to do it. I just won't do it.
it
If it
doesn't look like
requires
it's
more
hurt
time, it takes
sales,
more time.
though. It doesn't
No,
look.
thank
It's
God.
still
Knock on
shot
wood.
up. Yeah, I wonder if have you changed your plan, given because it really is late in the thriller year, but it may turn out that everyone's gone through their other thrillers and they got 5 more weeks of summer ahead of them. What do you think?
That could that'll be the tail of the tape when it's all over. We'll look at it and say this might have been the best thing that ever happened was me asking for a little bit more time to fix the end and get it exactly where I want it. But that's always my commitment. I don't work for Simon and Schuster. I work for the readers. Ultimately, they are my employers, and I want to give them the best I'm capable of.
Well, Shadow of Doubt is certainly that, the equal of any other Brad Thor novel, and it will teach you much that you need to know. It'll also teach you not to be a bicyclist for reasons that will be explained in Shadow of Doubt. Brad, Brad, I can't tell you. In fact, I'll tell you something off air. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Hugh.